We better get back, because it'll be dark soon, and they mostly come at night. Mostly.
Welcome to Mostly Horror.
Mostly. I don't know if you guys hear Kara saying welcome to Mostly Horror. She was trying to jump in and get my mostly in before me. Are you not hearing her? Is this just me? Nobody
just
else
you.
heard that? Oh, well,
Nope.
She's screaming. She's screaming. She's just yelling.
Sean's cat is screaming. I'm Steve, that's Sean, back with another episode, this time touching your childhood. I shouldn't say that. This time...
Keep it in. Keep it in.
This time we are not talking about... Actually, we're kind of
I think I hear sirens. Sirens out in Brooklyn.
We're talking about technically a current TV show, but
yes.
First and foremost, a extremely popular children's book series, the Spiderwick Chronicles.
Yeah, dude.
By our new friend Tony DiTerlizzi, who is on today's show. He also, obviously, his Spiderwick Chronicles books turned into a field guide, turned into a video game, turned into a major motion picture film, turned into a Roku original, previously Disney Plus original TV show. So Tony's on the show. We talk for like an hour about Spiderwick, and we get philosophical about stuff, and we talk about a whole lot of things, and it's a wonderful conversation. And he even teases some things that made us very excited for more. So excited for you guys to listen to that conversation. But before that, we should talk about some things that you probably already know.
I'm sure you already knew that.
You only tell me stuff I already know.
You already know what I'm going to tell you.
And the first thing, we got a big thing. We're going to keep it sandwiched in the middle. And the first thing I'm going to mention is a couple days ago, Bloody Disgusting posted an article that Aster is producing a Hansel and Gretel stop motion animated film.
Oh, get fucked. I didn't know that.
Very cool.
Yeah, dude.
Obviously, Hansel and Gretel has had some film adaptations recently. Oz Perkins did a film that I wasn't a huge fan of. Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. Obviously, you know, the Oscar award-winning, just kidding, movie. But yeah, so we have Ari Aster boarding this Hansel and Gretel film as an executive producer through Square Peg, which is their production company, him and Lars Knudsen. And it's being directed by Chilean filmmakers Cristobal Leon and Joaquin Cochina. And it says that the story is expected to twist the fairy tale into inimitable shapes that cannot be imitated. So another quote from a Variety article: "It is our very personal adaptation of the classic fairy tale, with the main difference that Hansel and Gretel are both boys in this version, at least at the beginning of the story."
What?
Cristobal Leon explained. In this telling, quote, "The story itself gets lost." And then Ari Aster says, "Cochina and Leon are among the true originals working in animation right now. You can trace their sensibility back to several artists of the uncanny, but there is no real analog for the effect that their work produces in the viewer," which is some high-ass praise from the guy who made Hereditary. So
yes.
Yeah.
I'm so in. That's fucking awesome. It doesn't sound like it's geared towards children, you know? Like it,
I don't think so.
Like no, and
I
just
would
like
guess
animation.
it's not.
Right. Animation that just like seeing horror or darker themes, or you know what I mean, in the animation space is just something that really excites me. Especially stop motion. It's an art form that, you know, we have both talked about a lot on the show. Something we both really appreciate and love. And I just don't see this being bad. As of right now, I'm very excited, and I have nothing but faith that it's going to be fucking cool.
It's also, I know it says that it's stop motion, but their last thing that they did, if you look up images of it, it says less a film than an immersive experience. The Hyperboreans mixes live action, stop motion, puppetry, and much else besides in an ambitious experimental psychodrama about the frankly deranged ideas of the controversial right-wing 20th century Chilean thinker Miguel Serrano. So they're just like, I think they made a film that is supposed to be just crazy.
You've already sold me. Just shut up and take my money. I'm so in. I'm literally so
Stop
in.
stabbing. He's already dead.
Yeah. Straight up, like overkill. I'm just put it in my hands.
Yeah. You got to look at they also did a film called The Wolf House. If you're able to look at the
Wolf House. Okay, here, let me look.
House.
While I pull that up, I want to say that, we talk about Beau is Afraid and things that we didn't love about Beau is Afraid, but Beau is Afraid has some cool stop motion and some cool... there's a whole fucking
they might
scene.
Well, I know that, but they might be the people. They might be...
That makes sense.
The people who did that. Yeah, they were a part of the animation department for Beau is Afraid. That
Boom.
makes so much sense.
Literally 1,000,000% down.
Skadoosh.
Just looking at Wolf House, like my trust has been placed. It is in their hands. I am excited. I feel like this is going to be great.
Yeah.
Do we have an idea? Did you say dates? Do we know when?
No, they're just jumping on us. I think even the film that I mentioned is not even coming out until like this year. Like the other one that they have. Wolf House is already out.
Got you. Right. Well, that was 2018. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, dude.
Yeah.
1,000,000% in. 1,000,000%. That's awesome.
Things that I may not be 1,000,000% in. We talked about the Crystal Lake series and how they're shifting their direction away from Brian Fuller. Horror Inc. This is an article from Bloody Disgusting. Horror Inc. has announced Jason Universe, which is said to be the dawning of a new era from the original owners of the Friday the 13th franchise. This goes on to explain that new Friday the 13th activations will span a wide range of platforms, from entertainment, games, immersive experiences, merchandise, and more to be announced throughout this year. This is a quote: "For decades, Jason shocked and thrilled audiences who kept coming back for more. We focused on honoring the legacy while elevating the fan experience and appealing to today's horror audiences as we develop new ways to watch, interact, and engage with the Jason universe." Note that they're not saying Friday the 13th here.
Yeah.
It says, with the unique ability to remain at the forefront of pop culture for 44 years, Jason continues to top charts as one of the scariest villains of all time. These are the people, I believe, that have the rights to Crystal Lake, which again is why it's called Crystal Lake and not Friday the 13th. And the movie rights are something totally different. So this is not movie rights.
Yes. Well, also in the movie rights, just in the rights in general, things are really complicated. Maybe at another point we can do like a full breakdown of that if anyone's interested.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's honestly, let's bring Adam on.
Yeah. Adam can walk us through it.
Adam can walk us through it. But basically, what I can say is that the rights issues were things that messed up the whole game. And there's someone that owns the original movie, and then those rights are different than the rights to the Jason character that we know now, because that Jason character is not a part of the original movie.
Yes.
But they have come to get, like, even though there was a big lawsuit and like separating that, there's also like differences. Like the person that owns the rights only owns the rights in America. And so it gets really confusing. We will maybe in the future break all that down. But all you need to know right now is that the rights are confusing, and that's a big part of this. And yeah, so you said that it's something that you're not super. You talk about your feelings about it, and then I'll talk about my feelings.
I just don't care. I just don't care about
Sure.
Jason.
Yeah, you're indifferent.
I don't care about Jason.
Yeah, it's so I'll say this.
Bateman?
I'm not like
Sure.
Patrick
Voorhees. Not a fan.
I'm not like a diehard Friday fan. But I
prefer Tuesday and Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm much more of a.
Yeah.
I'm actually like a Thursday kind of guy.
Yeah.
There's
Don't
something
call
about
me
the
Rebecca
anticipation. Black. Yeah. Friday's like too straight to the point. I like a little bit of weekend foreplay.
Yeah.
No,
that would be fun. I think.
I think that this, like, okay, I have fun with these movies. It's definitely not your like sphere of horror.
Yeah.
I have fun with these movies. They're not my absolute favorite. They're not ones that I throw on other than super casually, like in the background while I'm working on something, and even then it's not what I do a lot. Usually if I'm watching the Friday the 13th movies, it's around Halloween, and often with some friends. A few years ago, me and Olivia went through a lot of the franchise together, and that was great. And I think that that's, at least for me, what this franchise serves. what I will say about Jason Verse, I think that it could be so dumb to do with a lot of other things, but basically what they're saying is like they have this character and they want to like make him like more relevant, like bring him up to date, make him iconic. Well, not make him iconic, but just like give new life to him. Yeah, make money. That's what it is. It's about money. You're 100%. It's about money. But what I'll say is like if you're gonna do this with any character or franchise, I think this is a fair one to do it with. When you say the word slasher, I honestly think that the Friday the 13th franchise kind of best embodies what most people think about it. Slasher didn't start there, you know, like slasher wouldn't exist without giallo films. It wouldn't exist without Halloween or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's all these other things that had to happen and that are, you know, and especially Halloween being a start of that, all stuff we've talked about before. But I think Friday the 13th is where slasher really became what we know it to be today. And it's an ever growing and ever changing thing. But yeah, I just think that it's a franchise and a character where you can have a lot of fun. Yeah. You know, so if you're going to do it with anybody, do it. I would much rather see this than, you know, doing it with the stranger characters or something.
Oh, a bajillion percent. Yeah, I couldn't. I agree. I personally don't care. I'm happy for all the people that this will affect positively.
Yeah, they're going to put him in they're basically saying, hey, man, we're bringing Jason up. We're going to make products. We're going to put him in games. We're going to put him in new movies and new shit. And just make it fun. Just make it fun. It can be fun and it can make them a bunch of money and people can enjoy it and have a good time. Just actually treat it with some care. Act like you give a shit, you know, is what I'll say to them.
We're bringing Jason back. Yep.
Chelsea, can we get, you
need. Can you throw the yup in there? Just give me a yup. It's great. And then you had one other thing that they probably already know. Another thing I don't care about, unfortunately.
Sure, that's fine. Listen, I think it's interesting. This is not one that I'm going to say like, oh, I'm so excited. Like you definitely stole the show with your Ari Aster, Hansel and Gretel. Yeah. So now we're just talking about other things that are kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But another bloody disgusting article by friend that maybe we'll eventually get on. We talk about it all the time. John Squires. 1313. James Wan producing horror reboot of the Munsters. 1313 obviously being a reference to, you know, their house, their address. But yeah, dude, the article says, I'm just going to kind of read it straightforward for at least a second, but in the wake of Rob Zombie's direct-to-video movie The Munsters back in 2022, Universal has now... Chelsea, can we make that a lot louder? Can we get a couple of them and maybe some booze? We did not like that movie. Sorry, Rob. I love a lot of your other movies, but yeah, we already talked about that. Universal has now announced 1313, a brand new small screen reboot of the iconic television series. Developed and produced by James Wan, James Wan's company, Atomic Monster, the new Universal horror series is said to be a reimagining of the 1964 classic sitcom The Munsters that lives and breathes within the Universal Monsterverse. And then it goes on to talk about, you know, different people producing and stuff. Lindsay Anderson Beer, who did Pet Sematary Bloodlines, will serve as the showrunner for 1313.
Ah, that's encouraging.
Well, hold up. So I'll say that like Bloodlines is not this amazing thing. Like I didn't see it as like this awful whatever that someone who doesn't know how to make movies made. Yeah. I think it was someone that got attached to a product, and there's stuff in there that I like, and maybe if it wasn't just making a weird sequel, spin-off, whatever, to Pet Sematary. You know, I don't want it to dismiss Lindsay is what I'm trying to say.
Got it.
So I don't necessarily, yeah.
Did this say small screen adaptation? So this is not going to be a movie, it's going to be a TV show?
The new Universal horror series is said to be a reimagining.
Series. Yep. Yeah. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
Yeah, I thought it was a movie too, but I'm realizing as we read.
So this is coming out via Universal, via Blumhouse, via Atomic Monster.
Sure.
That's the
and dude, and that means so many different things. Do I have like a ton of faith for this? Who knows? No. Could it be fun? It totally could be fun. I think there is potential to revisit this series.
Listen, you know, we knew the things that were going to be wrong with the Munsters Rob Zombie movie as soon as it was announced that it was going to be a Rob Zombie Munsters movie. So I think at least this one, we don't have any like preconceived notions of what this is going to be outside of the description.
Yes. What I will say is if you will remember correctly, I was holding on to a lot of hope for Rob Zombie's monster movie. I think it was when I saw the first like trailer really that I was like, oh.
I wasn't.
Yeah, I know. And a lot of
I'm
people
a good
weren't, and
judge
that's
of character.
And also, I just try to be a little positive sometimes, but it didn't work. You were right. I do bow my head in defeat to that movie for sure. There is a little thing though in this that I wanted to bring up. It goes on to talk about like if you want to revisit it, it's available on a streaming service. I'm not going to tell you guys which one. But more recently, it says the series ran for just 2 seasons between 1964 and 1966, spawning several feature films and a sequel television series titled The Munsters Today, which was 1988 to 1999. But this is something I didn't know. More recently, Brian Fuller's Mockingbird Lane reimagined the series for NBC, but it never made it past a pilot episode. I didn't know that he did that.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we ever talked about that.
We probably did. It was early. And it was something that it was like, he's developing this, but it it didn't.
Can you see the pilot anywhere?
I'm sure you can't. I don't think.
On a shelf. It's in a storage bin covered in dust and Brian Fuller's tears. What's going on with people just not letting him?
Brian Singer?
No, Brian Fuller. At least unless they
it's Brian
up.
Fuller and Brian Singer.
Oh, the Bryans.
Yeah.
No, I just imagine them back to back, like in this, like an ad at the bottom of a sitcom. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Brian Fuller.
Yes.
So actually, maybe you can watch it.
It said it never made it past a pilot episode, which made me think that the pilot episode is out somewhere.
Well, they normally just don't put out a pilot.
That's true.
Interesting. I'll do some digging.
The pilot episode aired on Space Ghost Coast to Coast back in whatever.
That was all there was.
But dude, it just made me think about it because obviously, we were just talking about Jason and Crystal Lake and Brian being, stepping away or whatever happened with that. We still don't know like exact details. People should just trust Brian. Yeah, I would have loved to see his Crystal Lake. I would have loved to see his Munsters. And I don't know. A little bit of a bummer.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
That's okay. You know what I would love to see? Tony DiTerlizzi back on our show because our conversation with him is so good. You were a bit more influenced by Spiderwick than I was, so give the listeners a little taste before we get into it.
Guys, I'm just gonna be real. This was another one of those like childhood heavy hitters for me. I was thinking back to Steve being inappropriate earlier. Sorry, you're sick. But no, this was a huge one for me, guys. I guess not absolute childhood. The more I thought about it, I was like, I guess I was a little bit. I was probably like middle school when Spiderwick really came out. But the artwork absolutely caught my attention, even though I was like the actual like story itself and the book was a little younger than me. But I specifically remember being in a store and seeing the cover. I talk about this a little bit with Tony, but seeing the cover for Spiderwick and instantly drawn to his art and have been a diehard fan ever since. I didn't tell him this. I tweeted at him years ago about like, I would love, dude, back in like 2013 or something, like a long time ago, I was like, I'd love to have an art day with Tony DiTerlizzi. And he commented, and I guess he looked at my profile because he was like, I visit Michigan sometimes, like, you never know. And I'm like, get fucked. Like, it's so cool. I didn't bring it up when we talked to him, maybe next time. Yeah. But yeah, it was super awesome to talk to Tony. And we talk a little bit about the new show. I'm not going to super go into it. I personally am not absolutely in love with the new series, mainly because I love Tony's art, and it definitely is aiming for somebody else. Like, I am not the target audience of this show. But what, I don't know, to Tony's work in general is just so amazing, and what they did with Spiderwick is so good. And there's probably plenty of people out there that the new show will sit perfectly with. And it was just awesome to talk to him. Longtime fan.
Yeah, Tony was very cool to talk to, so really happy we were able to do that, and you guys will be happy to listen to it. So on that note, we'll get you guys over to our conversation with Tony DiTerlizzi, and then stick around for our mostly horror recommendations of the week. We might even sprinkle a little ape talk in there. Stick around. All right, we are joined today by Tony DiTerlizzi. Tony is a #1 New York Times bestselling author and illustrator who's been creating children's books for over 20 years. With Holly Black, he created the Spiderwick Chronicles, which has sold over 20 million copies, been adapted into a feature film, video game, and Roku original series, and has been translated in over 30 countries. And not only that, a mere 10 weeks after the all-time #1 Roku debut of the Spiderwick Chronicles in April, Tony is taking on Apple TV Plus in June with his Wandla series. There's even more stuff we could say, Tony. But thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
It sounds crazy when someone else is saying it to you.
Yeah,
I bet. Been, you know what I mean? It's just, for me, it's Tuesday, but yeah.
And there's even like more that we could say in this intro, but we'll talk about it later. Yeah,
sure.
The hardest part about prepping for this conversation today was taking your immense career and all the different things you've done and trying to figure out how to condense and what we could and couldn't talk about in the best conversations. And you've just done so much work.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for having me.
Of course.
Oh, so excited to have you. I am going to do a little bit of gushing for just a second.
Oh, gush away. Let me get comfy here.
I know especially after watching a lot of your interviews, I realized how common this kind of is, but this is definitely a case of kids that have grown up loving your art and are now adults still loving your art and talking to you about it. I specifically remember being in the store one day as a kid and seeing this specific book, the first Spiderwick Chronicles field guide, and just being like immediately blown away by the art. I also think, frankly, I had a little bit of a crush on Mallory, but instantly being like, what is that? I have to know what that is, and asking if I could get it, and just being completely inspired by your art and your pen work specifically immediately. It has impacted my art journey in my life. You're an early inspiration to me.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. Yeah. I specifically remember I saw when the movie came out in like 2008, I think. We went and saw it at a huge IMAX in Florida, and
nice.
at this golf course. I can't remember what it was, but I immediately went back to our hotel, and there was a pot that was like the lid was slightly ajar, and I just sat there and I did like a still life of it, but I drew my own fairy goblin inside of it. My grandma still keeps that in Howell. I wanted to find it and show you today, but I don't have it. But either way, you've inspired me for a long time, and I'm done with my gushing. And
that's awesome, though.
It's awesome to have you today.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I mean, geez, and it's awesome that you are a fan of the book and the film, because that doesn't always work out that way. And so that's super, super cool. And I'm glad you love my pen and ink drawings. I'm a big fan of pen and ink and classical pen and ink illustration, stretching all the way back to, the turn of the century, which is very much what Spiderwick was meant to look like, which was a fairy tale from 100 years ago, with the twist being, but it's modern day kids kind of encountering goblins and fairies and trolls and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the film, I my only thing with the film is I wish I saw more monsters always. That's how I feel about everything. More creatures.
I hear you on that.
And they changed, like, I love your designs and your artwork so much, and they played with those a little bit, and I'm like, I just want pure Tony, but I love the movie, and I just wish you had complete control and no budget issues.
Definitely budget was an issue. And there was, it's crazy with the film, there was the elves were in it. They were supposed to be in it, and they had a whole sequence. They had cast the elves. They were going to be humans playing the elves. And they had prosthetics on, and for their ears and makeup and stuff. And I don't remember the actress's name, but she had been in Deadwood, and I was super excited that they had cast her as one of the lead elves because she looked very elfin in her features. She had the little pointy features. And I think, first of all, I think there were story problems in that second act at where the kids go to see the elves, but also you've kind of set up a visual language in the film, which is all the fairies and the creatures from the fairy world are rendered in computer graphics, right? Like they're done in the Industrial Light and Magic or Phil Tippett, but they're done in the best quality, which really, if you think about that language, that subtle language, when we see these things, as real as they look, we know this is a creature from the fairy world. And this works to great effect at the end when Andrew McCarthy comes in and you're like, why is their dad there? Right? Because you're like, this can't be a fairy. This is just a human. It's just an actor. Well, I think the same situation happened when the elves showed up. You'd had at this point 20 or 30 minutes of state-of-the-art special effects, and then people came out with rubber ears on, and it just didn't work. That was a big part of it, which was heartbreaking and sad to see it go. But I mean, I understood it.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, it makes sense. And I think everything, you take especially like a multiple book story, you condense it down into a movie. It makes sense that certain things are going to be left out. And I think that what they did with, I can't remember the exact creature, but essentially like a sprite that ended up kind of taking Arthur instead. It worked is the point. It didn't kill it for me. Yeah. I just always want to see more of the art, but we're definitely going to talk about adaptation in a bit here. We want to touch on a few things, but we'd like to start with a question that we want to ask every guest on the show. We are a horror show. Mm-hmm. We're curious about your introductions to the horror genre, or maybe just like scarier things. We're looking for a moment when you were a little kid, and maybe we usually ask if you crept out and saw a movie from behind the couch that you weren't supposed to see, or had an adult show you something, or maybe you stumbled across an art book that really freaked you out. Do you have anything like that you could share with us today?
I think all of the above. I think for me, the idea of being, I grew up we had collections of Grimm's fairy tales and Andersen's fairy tales, and those certainly were, maybe creepy, because fairy tale logic is like, and they cut her foot off and she, you know what I mean? Like, and then the man's head was removed. Like, it's just like matter of fact. And that always just literally, scared the bejesus out of me. And then I think when you start to see that realized, in film, or in illustration. So for me, definitely, in the late 1970s, there was a book that came out called Fairies, and it was illustrated by Brian Froud, who would go on to work with Jim Henson and design the creatures for the Dark Crystal. Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But for your listeners, it was illustrated by Brian Froud, who would go on to design the characters for the Dark Crystal and later Labyrinth, and Alan Lee, who would go on to work on a little-known trilogy called Lord of the Rings. But the fairies and the way they were depicted, I read that thing cover to cover, and it's really just collected folklore from, England and Wales, and it just creeped me out. I was just at the right age when that book came out that I honestly believe that those stories were true. They just weren't happening in America. They were just happening in that part of the world, which I'd never been to at that point. And obviously a huge influence on Spiderwick. There would be no Spiderwick if it wasn't for Froud and Lee's Fairies. As far as horror books and movies, the other great thing I think I recall about being kind of a straight up Gen Xer and being a tween going into teens in the early 80s, there's a lot of cool stuff that happened in the early 80s. Like Dungeons and Dragons comes out, video games become huge, the rise of MTV. There's so much stuff when you look back, you're like, that was pretty cool. But one of the things that I very fondly remember was the rise of Stephen King. Stephen King became incredibly popular in the early 1980s I'm guessing after the success of The Shining, Kubrick film, and going in. But everywhere I looked, people were reading Cujo and Pet Sematary. The one for me, and we can talk about it more later, that had a tremendous impact was Cycle of the Werewolf, which was a short story that King wrote about a werewolf, but it was illustrated by Bernie Wrightson, who was a very well-known comic artist in the 1970s and the early 80s. And that story, it just had all the things for me when I read it at 13. It was spooky, it was scary, it was a little sexy, but not terrifically so, but just enough to be kind of titillating to a 13-year-old. And and the drawings by Wrightson are phenomenal. And it's just a perfect little introduction to Stephen King for me. And then from there I go on to become an avid reader of all his books in the 80s. So that was a big one. The movie, oddly, that comes to mind, and I did watch a lot of horror when I was, in the, classic films like Exorcist and Poltergeist, and then later the, Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and all that stuff. The one that really, literally scared the crap out of me, though, and I grew up in South Florida, which meant, at the time, it was dirt roads and fishing and catching snakes and snorkeling, and it was that kind of just beachy, scrubby life. So there was a film called The Deep, starring Jeff Bridges and Jacqueline Bisset, and we were watching. My parents were letting us watch it, even despite its R rating. I'm sure it had to have an R rating, and I was very excited because there was this giant moray eel. But there's a scene where they scare Jacqueline Bisset. I haven't even seen it in so long, I don't remember. But they do something I want to say it's kind of cheesy voodoo stuff to kind of spook her off with. I feel like there's chopped off chicken heads or chicken legs are involved, and she's crying and it literally scared the crap out of me. That is the thing, right? Poltergeist, I'm fine
Right.
with the portal into the dimension of death, and and people, Carrie, whatever, what's her face, Carrie Ann or whatever, getting sucked into the portal. That's fine for me. I can handle that. But that scene in The Deep just scared the crap out of me.
Wow. I'm sure growing up in that area too, it's Jaws is going to make more we talk about the impact of Jaws and how it makes everyone afraid of water. But if you live closer to it, I'm sure it's more impactful just by nature, especially something like The Deep or even, anything that's water related. Yeah.
It's funny how Jaws I loved Jaws but it did. I mean, as a kid though, I thought Jaws was boring. It's not till you're older that you realize, how amazing that the writing is. And I remember reading the Benchley book probably in high school. I'm like, let's see how this book, and loving the book, but it's mired in a lot more than I just wanted them attacking that shark. Let's go. The second act going into the third act is the stuff I loved as a kid, because we finally see the shark.
Yeah.
The Hitchcockian design of that first act going into the second act, which we find out later is because the dang prop wouldn't work. As a kid, it just didn't work on me. I think I was too young to really appreciate it.
That's fair. That's totally fair that you're like, no, I need action. Where's
the shark? I want to see the shark.
It's super fair. I will say that I think because I saw the teaser before another movie, before I ever saw the movie as a kid, of the woman swimming at night and by the buoy and stuff. And I did not need, I was so afraid every time I saw Jaws as a kid. And I still have an unhealthy fear of sharks to this day because of that movie.
But fair though. I do want to say, so speaking of watching all these things as a kid and unhealthy fears and things of that nature, you created, along with Holly, created Spiderwick, but also did a lot of things. Sean and I were talking before this, your illustrations of the spider and the fly, and you have these things that have a darker turn to them, even if they're not horror specifically, but they could be considered to be gateway horror or gateway to darker things for children.
Sure.
I'm curious your thought on the importance of that. You obviously have studied, we're talking about fairy tales and Grimm, and you've studied those, and I'm sure you have a wide knowledge of mythologies and things of that nature. And I'm curious your thoughts on the importance of introducing these themes or these ideas or these truths to children in a nicer way, and kind of being like a positive conduit to darker themes, if that makes sense. I'm curious your take on that, especially having a child that's now going into college.
Yeah. I think kids are dark just like adults. I think kids think about a lot of dark stuff. It's definitely, I'm not a child psychologist, but I'm going to assume, based on my own childhood and hanging out with kids all the time, they can have a very dark sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
And they can differentiate between what's a story and what's reality. And fantasy, whether it's highbrow, happy-go-lucky stuff or the darker stuff, for me, always helped me cope with the real world. That was my escape hatch to cope with whatever I was going through. And whether it was, Frodo Baggins trying to get that darn ring into Mount Doom, or, Hazel Rabbit being attacked by, General Woundwort and all his other rabbits just shredding him. I mean, those types of books for me really helped me through the bumpy parts of my life or the scary parts of my life. And so, a poem like The Spider and the Fly, and getting to illustrate that, for one thing, I didn't know the entire poem. I just knew the first stanza. So when I was asked to illustrate that, I was like, oh, this is fun. I could illustrate it like Chaz Adams or Edward Gorey or Tim Burton. All those came to mind after I completely read the full poem. But I was definitely like, wait, this is the end of the poem. She just dies. He just eats her. That's the end, And so I'm like, it's kind of like if Clarice goes to work with Hannibal and he just eats her and the credits roll. You know what I mean? That's the story, huh? And but kids love that. They love that. But I think that particular book works so well because it works against the norms that we see, what we saw in picture books 20 years ago and probably see in picture books today, which is there is no way the heroine of this book is going to die. That is the last thing. Somehow she's going to outwit the spider. Yeah. She's going to rally a bunch of other insects. She's going to do something and they're going to take that spider down. And no, that is not how this story goes. And that unexpected turn delights adults and it delights children. I wish I could have created it. But Mary Howitt did it 200 years ago and it still works to this day.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Sean.
Well, I was just gonna say it's brilliant. I love it. We were in Sleepy Hollow, or a town right by Sleepy Hollow. I don't remember what trip it was, and I went to a bookstore and just happened to find this, and have loved it since. But you have at the end of the story, you have even a little thing. Did you write the little of the spider being like, what did you expect? Like that was you. Okay.
Yeah.
You basically, essentially say what you said. Like, I'm a spider. What did you think was going to happen?
Yeah. If I was Charlotte in Charlotte's Web, I'd be eating bacon right now.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
You basically say like, Charlotte dropped the ball, not me.
Yeah.
That makes me want to ask, what are your thoughts about that kind of change? About, you said you're not a child psychologist, which I also wonder, like, I guess is a two-part question, but as like a parent and a children's book writer and author, how much you do look into stuff like that, like child psychology, or if you ever communicate with anyone. But I'm just curious about your thoughts on the evolution of children's stories and how a lot of the times we don't scare them as much as we used to. And I think the horror loving part of me and the kid that likes to be scared is like, why not? But but also I don't want to scar children. I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think two parts. So one of my really good friends is a child psychologist, and I will run books by him. He's a big reader and he loves probably a lot of the movies you both love, and probably loves a lot of the same books. We definitely talk about a lot of movies and books and stuff. And so I will have him read stuff, and will occasionally ask him what he thinks from a psychological viewpoint. But I don't want to feel like I'm only having him read it just for that. And my new book, which I wish I could talk about, that I just finished, is the darkest book I've ever written, and he was very involved. I needed him to help me with that because I wanted to do something very true to myself and a very what I felt was a very psychologically dark story that I wanted to do for middle grade thing. So to answer part of your question, it's also, what does 10-year-old Tony want that old 50-year-old Tony can now make? That is usually my starting point. And then I test drive it on, my daughter or her friends. I'll talk about like, hey, I'm writing a story about this. What do you think about that? And they'll tell me, I think with regards to the tone of picture books, I guess, and I'm a little out of touch with picture books these days because I don't do them as often as I used to. I do feel as a parent that there's an overall sense of dread and fear that has definitely permeated a lot of people. I think it's, and this is just my opinion, I could be completely off on this. It's probably fed by just 24-hour news cycles. Wherever you sit politically, it doesn't really matter. They're both being, just shoveled tons of garbage.
Yeah.
The sensationalism of horrible things that happen on our planet, no matter whether it's a local burglary to a large scale problem or a war in another part of the world, it deeply affects all of us, which reminds me that we're all interconnected. We're all connected, and we really are all trying to do this together and do the best that we can. But I do personally fear that ever-present media has perhaps shaped a generation of not just kids, but parents too, who just are more fearful of a world than they were when I was a kid, 40 years ago in the late 70s and early 80s. My parents were certainly fearful, but it's the old trope of like, all right, go out and play. And when the lights come on, you better be home, and you can go a mile this way and a mile that way. And we did that. And that doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
And so you have to ask, well, why? What happened? What changed between then and now? And the biggest culprit I can see just seems to be ever-present media, television stations going from, they came on in the evening to they're on all day. The news came on at, in the morning and at 6 and at 11. Now it's on all day. And then with the internet, forget it. It's everything all the time, everywhere, all at once. That must be it. But I'm no sociologist.
Yeah, that's very fair. I think, to that point, and not to like debate this, I do agree with you wholeheartedly. I think a lot of these things, it's probably different for horror films than it is for like children's books, but I think it creates a world that's rife for opportunity for horror films specifically, because I think about like Satanic Panic informing almost how well, or not how well how good the response was for like The Exorcist or something along those lines, but it made people want to create art that's like counter to the fears of today's society. And obviously it's got to be harder for children's media in general. So that makes sense why you would want something that's maybe a little bit more comforting. I guess to the tune of what you were saying earlier, where you watch something, whether it's a movie for kids or not, and the protagonist is always going to succeed.
Yeah.
Like that is something that I am far too often acknowledging as I'm watching a film. And I wonder if that's just always been the way, or if it's, just a part of like today's society.
With regards to like just movies or books, or
I think really just the thing that the protagonist is always going to succeed at the end of the story. It's very rare that a film will leave you with an ending that you don't feel some sort of positive resolution about. Right. And that's why The Spider and the Fly is a great example of that, or a film like The Strangers, where bad shit happens just because, like, that's one of those things. I don't know, we're getting kind of philosophical here, but I was just curious, that.
Well, tragic or is a tragic ending.
Yes,
the film that pops to mind while you talk about that is, there's a couple great ones. I mean, I think of Gladiator and I think of Braveheart. I mean, those are both stories where the main character, Now I'd have to think about it. I don't know if William Wallace is the protagonist
Yeah.
of Braveheart. He may not be.
Fair.
No, he may be. He may be a catalyst to the Prince of Ireland. I don't remember who he is. That's the character that changes, right? Because he's kind of wishy-washy about getting involved, and by the end, he picks up the sword. So they may have just focused on William Wallace as the interesting. But he dies, right? I mean, he's, and then, of course, Gladiator, he physically dies, but the concept of who he is and his legendary status, I guess, lives on. So his ideals persist, and the his antagonist's ideas, I suppose, die away. I'm guessing. It's been a long time since I watched it, but there are still stories out there, I suppose, that do that. But yeah, maybe not as. I guess it just depends on where society is and what they're open for. I do think kids. I'm hearing. My wife Angela was just on book tour for her new picture book, The Curious Why, and went to a lot of bookstores all over the country. And the big ask was that middle grade kids want horror. They want it. Yeah. So I think that's exciting. And obviously, R.L. Stine has been delivering that for 30 something years now. And couldn't be a more amazing and delightful human being. I'm trying to think. There must be others that are delivering it in the children's book space that I'm just not aware of.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I was a kid, I was just kind of bombarded with these happy ending sort of stories, and what drew me to like darker tales, tragedies, and horror was I kind of felt like I found an honesty in there, or at least like a more not that like not to sound like complete pessimistic, but I was just like, this can happen too. Like I like that things can't always go the right way, and seeing how people deal with that, like when things don't go the right way, and what can be found in that journey, if that makes sense.
Because that's life.
Exactly. There's
right.
100%. And facing something, even if you're going to lose, because it's important to fight anyway, and things like that, like all sorts of messages in there. I really quick, I just want to go back and say, I totally agree about the media thing. It's a flip of like, we're both being exposed to the realities of the world in ways that we haven't before. And there's positive things about that, like being aware of the truth instead of not being as, not having it, having to think about these things that affect so many people, but also what does it do to the mind, and how is it affecting, our psyches, and how we raise our kids. And that's we could go into a whole podcast episode about that in itself.
That's a lot.
We obviously have to talk a little bit about Spiderwick here. We kind of want to set the stage and want to talk, about adaptations, like we were saying. But just for anyone who might not know, can you talk a little bit about Spiderwick, what it is, and how it got it started, and that relationship with Holly?
Oh yeah, sure. So in the 80s, in Florida, I think I was in middle school. I was either in 6th or 7th grade. It was the summer. And I was a kid who, especially in the hottest part of summer in Florida, when like August, when it's really hot, as much as I loved being outside, I'd rather be inside because it was just so hot. And so I would often do these projects alone in my bedroom where I would draw. One year I drew a comic book about my hamster, and every day I would do a page and pencil it and ink it and everything. And so one summer, super inspired by the Brian Froud book that we talked about, Fairies, and playing Dungeons and Dragons nonstop for a year, and my love of the Monster Manual, I made kind of a Audubon style field guide to trolls and goblins and dragons and stuff, and I just did it in like a old notebook, just notebook paper drawings with marker drawings of dragons, and then would write about them. And, I would use I had these little Golden Book made these little pocket field guides that I had collected some on, insects and birds and lizards. And I would kind of use that kind of vernacular to to like this nocturnal beast is often seen, omnivorous and that kind of thing, and used Wile E. Coyote scientific nomenclature, so like biggest, baddest, fire breathest, that kind of thing. And I, every day I would do a drawing and write about it, and then I, at the end of the summer I was done, and it went under my bed with everything else. But I never forgot about that idea, that concept, and I revived it a couple times throughout the early part of my career. Certainly tried to sell it to TSR, who were the publishers of Dungeons and Dragons back then, but they didn't know what to do with it. And so years went on, and The Spider and the Fly, which you mentioned, was my third picture book that came out. And it changed my life in a lot of ways. Number one, it was a New York Times bestseller. It was my first bestseller, which was very exciting. And number two, it won a Caldecott Honor Award, which is kind of like the Academy Awards for children's lit, and specifically for the illustration. And the publisher, Simon & Schuster, said, "Boy, you're on a roll. Like, what if you could do any book? What book would you do right now? What's your next book?" And I thought, man, I'm not going to get asked this too many times in my life. This is an amazing opportunity. And I thought, what would 10-year-old Tony want that, at that time, 30-year-old Tony can make? And I thought about this field guide that I had made. And so I kind of had been tinkering with it. And at this point, my wife and I were living in Brooklyn, New York, and we had met Holly and her husband Theo pretty early on. Holly was working for a small Philadelphia-based gaming magazine called D8, and it primarily focused on the gothy stuff that was really big in the 90s, like Vampire the Masquerade and Changeling and so on and so forth, Werewolf. And so she came out to interview me and my involvement with Dungeons and Dragons, and we just hit it off terrifically. We had very similar childhoods, and she knew folklore like nobody's business. And so we became fast friends, and she was really helping me at that point, kind of doing the homework on brownies and Scandinavian trolls and the difference between an Eastern dragon and a Western dragon. Like, she knew all that stuff and was kind of helping me and loaning me books. And so I tried to sell Simon & Schuster this idea of this field guide. And my editor kind of leans back and he goes, "Well, tell me about the guy who made the field guide." And I said, "Well, his name is Arthur Spiderwick. And here's the thing, like, nobody believes this guy. He thinks he's like Charles Darwin, and he can see into the fairy world that no one can see into any longer. And he's drawing all this stuff, and he thinks it's going to change the world, but not even his wife believes him." And he's like, "Interesting, but I don't think kids are going to care about some old guy from 100 years ago who could see dragons and trolls." And so we were really stuck for a while where we didn't know, and it wasn't looking good. There's literally a moment where my editor, Kevin, and my wife, Angela, they took me to like a Mexican restaurant and start getting me drunk to basically tell me, "Your fantasy field guide book is not going to happen, dude. It's too expensive. It's too out there. No one's getting it." And at a certain point, he kept asking though about the field guide, and I don't know who said it. We might have been Kevin, my editor, or it could have been Holly, but somebody goes, "Well, what if modern day kids, contemporary kids, find the field guide? What happens then?" And boom, we were off to the races. It was like, oh my God. And now bear in mind, this is in a period in the early 2000s, this is probably 2001, 2002. Mm-hmm. So Harry Potter's on the rise, but it hasn't hit like total ridiculous levels yet, right. But it's big. And the Series of Unfortunate Events was out, and it was doing quite well. And so the idea for us of ordinary kids in extraordinary circumstances was super appealing to us, because these other books kind of centered on extraordinary kids. And we wanted, kind of to your point earlier, Sean, where like, what about like real kids and bad stuff happens to them? And so we thought, like, how can we make this American and be super contemporary? Like, how can we make it feel, like I said earlier, it's almost like I want to look like an old fairy tale, but the kids are wearing jeans and sneakers, but they're fighting ogres and dragons and all this stuff. And we started talking about divorce, and we kind of hit upon this idea of anger, and how the theme of anger runs through a lot of folklore and fairy tales. So like in a house brownie, which is a little spirit that takes care of your house. In the Spiderwick books, he's Thimbletack. In a series like Harry Potter, it's Dobby the elf. But if you anger this brownie, it becomes a boggart, and then it's almost like a poltergeist. It's doing horrible stuff throughout the house. So there's an example of anger. And then something like an ogre who would be really angry, like it'd be massively angry, like anger unhinged. And then how does that echo our protagonist Jared, and why is Jared angry? So you can see how the dots of the constellations start to connect, and we start to figure it out. But at the end, I had figured out some of the story, but not all the story. Holly came in, and she's a brilliant storyteller, and together we were able to just come up with this story of these three kids, and I couldn't have done it without her. And we always talk that it's like it's not quite a Holly Black book, and it's definitely not a Tony D book, but it's like a weird third hybrid thing that neither of us could have created, and we really didn't think it was going to do that well. I know that sounds like a humble brag, but it's true. We really were like, I mean, I guess we can put these books out and we'll see, but
yeah,
we had no idea. You don't know. All we wanted to do is like, maybe if these books do well, we can do the big crazy field guide, and as luck would have it.
Yeah. So that story is so great. So there's a number of questions. A, where were you at in Brooklyn? Because I currently am in Brooklyn. I'm just curious for my own sake.
Yeah. I was we moved to Park Slope in like 1995, 96.
Nice.
And we were on like Garfield, right off 7th Avenue, because you could afford it back then.
Yeah.
And First Street. We moved like around the corner. But we were there for, almost 10 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go take a walk by your old place in a little bit here. But I think it's funny you mentioned Lemony Snicket. We had Daniel Handler on the show in our earlier years. I do think, luckily there, he has that postmodernist nihilistic niche that, you can that stands, in its own kind of separate lane. I am
Absolutely
curious, what is the moment like for you when you finally get to release the field guide? Like you did the legwork, I guess, so to speak, of creating this contemporary world, but you did finally publish said field guide.
Field guide, yeah.
Was that the ultimate moment for you? Kind of what was that like? It
was a whirlwind. When I think back on that entire period, my memories flash to Holly coming up to Massachusetts once we had just moved here, and she and I kind of laying on the floor and kind of just talking, and I'm sketching and we're kind of talking about story. But once those first 2 books came out, the publisher said, listen, we have to keep releasing books every 6 months, because if we don't, the kids who started reading it are going to outgrow it before you finish it.
Wow.
So we're like, okay, let's go. Right. Again, amazing opportunity of a lifetime. We just jumped in head first, didn't care. Just like, let's go. Holly and I were like in, but what we didn't realize was that meant you're making a book, then you're out touring for the book, which back then you toured for a month. Like easy. And then you tour the US, and then you'd go fly over to England and you do the same thing over there. And you're turning down Australia and Germany and all these other places that also want you, because it's being published all over the world. And at the same time that the book is being, when we sold the concept to Simon Schuster, Simon Schuster was owned by Viacom at the time, who also owned Nickelodeon and maybe even Paramount. So they were all about this synergy and looking for, well, where's our Lemony Snicket? Like that kind of thing. So they're like, oh, this Spiderwick book, that could be our Harry Potter. That could be our thing. So let's fast track that development on the movie and get that out there as soon as possible. And they were writing the scripts before we were finished with the books at that point. Like we had outlines of like, we think this is where it's going. But they were already, trying to write these early drafts of the scripts and inventing insane stuff along the way, because they didn't quite know where it was going to land. So it was just a crazy roller coaster. So by the time we get to the field guide, they're like, okay, I want to say, I think 6 or 8 months to do all the art for the field guide. It's one of the few times in my life I've kept a diary, because Angela said you need to keep a diary because I think you're going to want to remember. First of all, this was a dream come true project, but what you're about to go through, which is I had to get one of those super high end paintings done. I had to get one done like every few days to make the deadline, to get the release date, because the clamoring for it was so high. We built it up with those chapter books.
Yeah.
And Spiderwick Mania was a thing. People were really excited about it. We were selling millions of books at that point. And, and it got stupid. They were like, we're putting it in cereal boxes, and they're making a video game, and we're doing Happy Meals.
Yeah, I was going to say
Happy
McDonald's.
Meals. Freaking Happy Meals? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what? It was crazy. And it's a little bit of a blur when I think back on it now. But I'm completely dumbstruck and honored that it happened. It's just amazing to have had that experience, that giant wave kind of crash. And like a good wave, once it crashed on the world, it sucked back out, and then nobody wanted anything to do with Spiderwick for years after that.
I just have to say that I'm totally the kid. I love what you guys did with bringing in, the kids and the kid perspective. It makes sense, like story-wise, it makes sense. It feels like a story that, I don't want to speak for you, but I can just imagine it almost like once the pieces line up, it just kind of writing itself. Like it works so brilliantly. But I'm totally the kid that would have also just bought the field guide, like 100%. I was, after reading these, I remember just being like, I want the book though. I want to be able to go through the guide. So yeah, I'm also in New York. I've been trying to figure out what kind of sprites and things I can find in Central Park.
I was going to say, Sean keeps saying was. There is no was. It is. It's
yes.
present. Yeah, that's all present for both of us.
You brought up the movie, and you mentioned earlier, that not people don't always, like, people that love the book don't always love the movie, and you guys obviously have this new show out. So we obviously want to talk about that a little bit, and maybe the way in there is to kind of talk about adaptation in general. It's a conversation we have a lot on our show. A lot of people, especially in the horror community, horror particularly, is having a remake boom right now. It's just nothing but remakes. I think there's a lot of great stuff that comes out of that. A lot of people are really tired of it and exhausted of it, but I kind of see it as it's something we've always done. We've always retold as a species, we've always have retold the stories that are important to us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You've tapped into, like with the Spider and the Fly, helping in a retelling, your Kenny the Rabbit books, touch on these old tales. So with that in mind, I'm just curious about your thoughts on adaptation and what people have done with your work and the ways that they've changed things and what it's like to kind of hand over your baby to somebody else, and how people have responded to it. I know it's a big question, but take it in the way that makes sense to you.
A lot of pieces. Well, I think I have to go back on, okay, as an author, why would I want to have my book adapted? Because it Angela said, look, it's either gonna not get made, or it's going to get made and it's going to suck, and it'll either meet or exceed your expectations. But for me, my introduction to Roald Dahl, and I read a lot of Roald Dahl as a kid, was Gene Wilder. I saw Gene Wilder play Willy Wonka, and we were talking about it at school, so I don't remember. And anyway, the librarian at our elementary school shows us this Roald Dahl section, and there's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And wait, there's a sequel? They did another story? There's more Charlie and Willy Wonka? And wait, he did a book about a giant peach and all these other characters. And that was a huge gateway for me into discovering who Roald Dahl was at a very young age. And so I'm a firm believer of adaptation and allowing your work to be changed. And I think we're a much more savvy audience than we were even 20 years ago, where we understand that an adaptation into television or film is not necessarily the direct result of the creator of said source material making this film. I think that's what I would have thought as a kid. I would have thought, oh, well, Roald Dahl helped make this movie with, the directors, and nothing could be for. Sometimes they're involved, many times they're not.
Right.
Yeah.
As the years have gone by, and I love movies, I love TV, I love video games with great narrative threads, and obviously I love books and reading. I've seen amazing adaptations that have nothing to do with the book, right? So like think of that I loved that Zathura Jumanji. Oh, I love Zathura as well. That was an early Jon Favreau film, but I love Jumanji with Dwayne Johnson playing the lead. Like that has barely anything to do with Chris Van Allsburg original book, but I still enjoyed it. My daughter loved it. We had a good time. We ate a bunch of popcorn. It was fun. It was a fun ride, but had little to do with, the book. Another great adaptation that most people probably don't even realize, Night at the Museum starring Ben Stiller was an adaptation of a picture book. And then we've seen, I think, adaptations that are very close, very, very close to the source material, almost maybe I'd say too close to the source material, and maybe you might not reach people. I would argue that there was no other way to do it, but I think those early Harry Potter adaptations are visually stunning, but pace-wise are a little off because they're not quite on a 3-act structure that we're just used to seeing a movie unfold. And I think it's later, once they've built that audience in and some of the other writers and directors come in, that it feels more like a movie. But I don't fault Chris Columbus. I can't even imagine how much pressure that poor guy was under to get this right.
Yeah.
And so, there's a spectrum of great adaptations and not so great adaptations. And we've seen it from Game of Thrones to, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, so, and Stephen King is a great example, right? I've talked about horror. So you've had amazing adaptations and you've had not so great adaptations. And the thing that I learned from specifically Stephen King, is if you're lucky, they'll come back and they'll try it again. Right. Yeah. So how many versions of, we've got at least 2 versions of it. Is there a 3rd version of it that I'm not thinking of? There's obviously the most recent ones, and then there's the Tim Curry one.
Yeah. I can only think of the 2. Well, there's
2. Okay,
but they're doing Welcome to Derry, which is coming out.
Yeah,
right.
Maybe that's
yep.
The Shining's been revisited a couple times.
Yeah.
And so the fact that we're even talking about a new Spiderwick adaptation blows my mind, because I definitely thought that would be 70-year-old Tony would be like, well, I guess they've decided to come back. Like I just didn't think it would happen this quickly, to be honest with you, because the movie for the most part is pretty solid. It's not a bad adaptation. It condenses a lot and it reappropriates some of the character arcs to different characters, but for the most part it captures the spirit of the book and the main characters. That's really the most you can hope for, to be honest with you, when you're transmuting a thing that's paper and words into, celluloid or zeros and ones, depending on how you watch it. It's alchemy, and you don't always get it right. It just really depends, I think, on the point of view of the writers and the director. I think as an audience member, I like if it makes me feel the way I felt when I read the book.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is all 3 of us could read the same book and maybe feel a little different about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always work.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, it totally makes sense. Like you said. And I think there's also like the audience play, like different generations and speaking to different people. And, with a movie, you're condensing something. With a show, you're dragging it out. I will say, I think as such a deep lover of your artwork specifically, I want to see it get like the Leica or the Don Bluth treatment, like straight traditional animation or even some puppetry.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But yeah, they touching on the themes and the heart is ultimately what's, the most important most of the time in adaptation.
That's the thing you're going to remember, right? I think any good story, that's the memorable bits. That's the stuff that touches you emotionally, really, no matter how it's skinned, right? Because we've seen glossy, good-looking films, or they just don't have the heart, or the writing's not there, and it just leaves us a little empty. And you're like, oh man, I wish it was better. It was so close. So, and they had the budget to do it, and I mean, we've all seen that. So I will lean more on the writing and the emotional arcs of the characters much harder, because I feel like that is where I'm feeling. I mean, the one that comes to mind as a parent is, watching something like Finding Nemo. It's a talking clownfish, and I'm tearing up watching this thing.
Devastated.
Because you know what I mean? Like, and it's like, oh my gosh, like, it's because the writing is so good. That's why. And so if it makes me feel any kind of emotion, then laughter, anger, fear, sadness and joy, like that's so hard to do. That's the magic trick. If you can suspend your belief to such an extent that you're actually feeling something as you're watching it. And that can be a actor's performance. Doesn't always have to be terrific writing. Could be the music, the soundtrack. There's so many aspects to filmmaking that I certainly don't claim to know all about.
Yeah, it's to you. I loved you calling it alchemy. I think that is a great way to represent book to film adaptations that a lot of people don't think about. It's not just 1-to-1.
No.
So I really appreciate that. I also want to note our last episode that we're putting out before this is with actor and director Jim Cummings, and he referenced Bing Bong in Inside Out, and now you're talking about Finding Nemo. So Pixar's got to be doing something right.
Yeah.
I know Pixar doesn't make enough money, but they got to be doing something right. I think we would be remiss. We only have a little bit of time left with you, but we want to talk about monsters and creatures. Sean and I are big fans. You're obviously a big fan.
Oh yeah.
You brought up D&D.
Mm-hmm.
Not only did you have the huge list of things that I talked about at the beginning of this episode, but you created an entire D&D. What would you call it? Is it
campaign world
campaign? Yes, exactly.
We're not as big D&D.
Yes, although we would love to be, but you've done so much in D&D. You've done an extensive amount of work in Magic the Gathering, creating creatures and art and things of that nature.
Yes.
Why do you think people of all ages respond so well to monsters or creatures, or why do you think creatures resonate with so many different people? Like, what is it about something that's not human and maybe scary or weird looking or whatever that really resonates with people?
That's a great question. I don't know. I know what resonates with me, and I see myself in the monster when I read a book or watch a movie, right? I mean, I think that's it. That misfit, that outcast of society, that aberration. I often look at it, especially when I was a kid, and thought, "Oh, that's me. I'm the weirdo. I'm this thing." So I think that's always been it psychologically for me. I don't know, again, why the rest of the world reacts the way they do. I think the best monsters are manifestations of emotion. It doesn't always have to be fear. It could be anger, be sadness, loss. And I think watching movies or reading books about that allows us a safe place to confront those intense emotions and process them, and figure out how to lead a better life with the people we love and our neighbors and stuff, because we are figuring out the complexities of being a 21st century human being.
Mm-hmm.
That's always, I think of, King Kong, it was beauty that killed the beast. And it's that a monster out of time and out of place. And that's just, why is that so poignant? Why does that hit so hard from, geez, almost 100 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And I think because there's a lot of times I've felt out of time, out of place, to be honest with you. And I can think of a few girls in my past life when I was, in high school that certainly broke my heart and made me feel like I'd fallen off a skyscraper and shot down by planes. But I just, I think, again, I'm sure there's critics who could analyze a movie like King Kong and more. Well, there was the rise of civilization and the industrial age and blah blah blah, and the encroachment of urbanization onto the natural world. But like, why do we still feel the same way we feel when we see it? And maybe the best stories, maybe they mutate like a good monster from generation to generation, and each generation actually gets something a little different out of it than maybe even the creators were even thinking of when they made it, whether they were writing it as a screenplay or writing it as a book. I mean, I think that there's definitely people, we love to reanalyze a film or a book from years ago and think about it now in a modern context, for better and sometimes for worse. But that's kind of fascinating. I think the best monsters teach us a little something about ourselves, no matter what decade they're from.
Yeah.
Absolutely love that. Could not agree more.
Can I get an amen?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I do 100
We've
amens.
gotten, like,
Actually,
strangely philosophical and like whatever on this episode. It's been great.
To our editor Chelsea, we would like an amen in there if we could
Yes,
get a
can
sound.
we throw an amen right after that?
Tony,
Some holy music playing in the background while
Yes.
I'm just going on and on.
Chelsea, you heard it here.
Royalty
Make
free.
it happen.
Royalty
Tony's
free,
got demands.
please. Yes.
There are seriously so many things that we'd love to talk with you about. We are coming to the end of our time, so got to leave some of it. We were gonna get into alien territory, a whole bunch of stuff.
Nice.
But
Next time. That's all.
Yeah.
Next time.
Next time. I do want to ask, before we get to our Rex section, I'm curious, probably a question you've been asked before. Do you have a favorite, or maybe a monster that you find most haunting, whether it be from a horror movie or just from lore that you've heard of, or potentially even your own books?
Anything with ghosts, always. Yeah, I think because it's, you're dealing with death, and the idea that an apparition, whether it's first of all, everybody has a ghost story. Somebody has a story. They've heard something from someone. Like, everybody's felt something, seen something, heard something from somebody. Like, that ever-present lore,
Yes,
story is in of itself a bit haunting. But the fact that it's confronting one of mankind's biggest questions and doesn't give an answer that we're quite hoping for, right, based on the proof that we see or the stories that we hear, that always kind of, leaves me a little cringy. I think it's maybe why I've never tackled a ghost story before. I've thought about it. Holly and I have actually talked about telling a ghost story together, but maybe one day. But definitely any kind of ghost, really good, solid ghost story. Always
Nice.
gets to me. Yeah. And it can be as stupid as Ghost Hunters. I'm going to be honest with you. Just watching that show where, there's just someone out of frame, banging two bricks together. What was that? It still works on me. I'm still in. I'm like, what was that? There's no way. There's something going on.
Right there with you.
Yeah,
Right there with you.
That's so
Like a
good.
guy with like a hammer just hitting shit.
Yeah.
randomly.
Yes. Listen, if it works, it works. All right.
It works.
That's all
The
that
ratings.
matters. Yeah, like Sean said, there's so many things we could talk about. We're excited for your Wandla series, which has been, you've obviously been working on it since your daughter was born, and now she's going into college, and you have this animated series coming out with Skydance Animations. Very excited for that. Maybe like we said, next time we'll dive into
And your
it
new
more.
dark work that's coming out.
Yes,
your new
whatever
dark work.
Yeah.
TBD.
TBD.
Dark
Yeah,
thing
I'd love
is.
to come back and
Definitely.
talk to you all about that. That'd be fun.
Yes, we'll
be
have
really
to
fun.
do that. But to wrap up, we end all of our conversations with something we call mostly horror recommendations. Typically, it's a horror film and a non-horror film you would recommend to our listeners. For you, Tony, any type of media you want to recommend, one horror, one non-horror. We would love to hear what you got for our audience today.
Well, I brought up Cycle of the Werewolf which again is it Stephen King's best book, I mean, that's debatable. But for me, as a 13-year-old, it certainly was. I loved that book. It was beautifully illustrated by Bernie Wrightson. It's a great little story. It was turned into a film. I think it was called Silver Bullet. I think Silver Bullet is this is the source book for. Oh, now he's like, wait, now I know.
Well, no, because I didn't know the book. I'm looking at the artwork, and it's amazing. By the way, I'm absolutely going to be looking into this artwork.
It's a fun one. Yeah,
couldn't remember that movie, and all you had to do was say Silver Bullet. Now I got you. Okay.
So recently I rewatched Poltergeist, which didn't really scare me, but there's a huge Mandela effect in Poltergeist, which is, and maybe see if you guys, I don't know when the last time it was that you watched this. What is the house built on?
An Indian burial ground.
I thought it was built on an Indian burial.
A Native American.
Not built on an Indian burial ground. That's what I thought too. Right.
What?
When Jo Beth Williams is in the pool at the end and the corpses all come up.
Yeah.
It's just a cemetery. It's just a cemetery. Cause that's the whole thing is the main, the father's yelling at his boss, his developer. He's like, you moved the headstones, but you didn't move the graves. You didn't move the graves. It was just a cemetery. It was not an Indian burial. I don't know how that's happened. Maybe the sequel, maybe the second one's an Indian burial ground.
Tony, I think you just bumped me into a parallel universe. It's probably just because Pet Cemetery is an Indian
definitely
site,
yeah,
so maybe
definitely is Indian burial ground
but
for that. Yeah.
You just shocked my mind because I've seen Poltergeist a million times, and it's only been a year or two since I saw it last. So, but
it's not an Indian burial, right? I was waiting for the Indian burial ground, and I'm like, it's not. No, because in the pool it's just caskets. Don't you remember the caskets come up and they open and they're wearing the jewelry and everything? And I'm like, wait, there's no Indian. Where are the Indians? There's no Native Americans. What where are they? They're not here. There's none of it.
You're so right.
Wow.
Yeah, kind of a crazy one. So that was kind of a fun. I was very excited about when you mentioned it at the top of the hour when you're like, all right, give us a great one. I'm like, I watched this recently.
I like that.
Really
That's
interesting. Yeah,
I appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely.
What books have I? Well, you mentioned Sleepy Hollow. I actually went back and have reread some of Washington Irving, and particularly Sleepy Hollow is a really interesting story to totally nerd out because it is so not what you think it is at all. Like Ichabod Crane is kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
For your listeners, if you don't know the story, it's about a school teacher from New York City who moves to upstate along the Hudson River. There's all these little towns, Croton on the Hudson and Peekskill and so on and stuff. And Sleepy Hollow is one of them, which was, at the time that Irving writes is kind of a Dutch settlement and mostly farmers. And he comes in and like the New York hotshot, and he's like, I'm going to be the school, he's like the skinny guy. He's described very much like the skinny guy with big feet. And all this guy does is eat. He's that guy. Yeah. He must have an incredible metabolism, right? He's just constantly eating, going to kids' parents' house. Parent teacher conference. I don't know. But all he's doing is eating. So then along comes Katrina von Tassel, right? The wealthy farmer's hot daughter who's flirting with everyone in town, who Irving describes as, a peach, as buxom, like really makes it clear. And what is Ichabod interested? The food at her house, which is amazing, right? He could get, cool, whatever. She's hot, I guess. I mean, I don't know, but look at those candied yams. That's what I'm here for.
Oh, that's kind of relatable.
Got roasted pig. So it's really interesting that's the humor in it. And then Brom Bones, the third part of this love triangle, who, I mean, I don't even think it was a triangle. I think Katrina's just using Ichabod to just get at Brom. Yeah. But then the Headless Horseman, it's just Brom. Like, it's so obviously just, there is no Headless Horseman. It's so great. The eeriness, how he describes the tree and the graveyard and all that stuff. Love all that. It's so great. That backdrop to the story is what really, they're talking about the Catskills and everything. That's what makes it so, so fun. But yeah, a reread on that, I was kind of like surprised. Also, Washington Irving, Rip Van Winkle. How long do you think he sleeps for?
100 years?
How long?
20 years. 20 years. This guy. I'm like, why do we all think he slept for 100? I don't like. He like goes to sleep as a dude and wakes up as like ZZ Top with the beard and everything, and it's like No, dude, he grew that in 20 years.
There
20
has
years.
to be modern adaptations that changed it or something. You're shifting me into a different world. You're freaking me out right now, man.
It's a sadder, less exciting world, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's 2 Mandela effects at the end of this episode is not what I was expecting.
Yes.
But yeah, that is,
My work is done.
Wow. That was, we asked for recommendations. You said, I'm going to blow your mind.
Yeah.
That was great. Tony, we really appreciate the time. We're going to hold you to that coming back for your darker story somewhere down the line.
Let's do it.
Everyone check out the Wandless series when it premieres on Apple TV Plus in June.
Yep.
Tony, thank you again so much. We really appreciate it. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening to our conversation with Tony DiTerlizzi, one of the co-creators of the Spiderwick Chronicles. Thank you again to Tony for listening, for hopping on with us. It is now time for our mostly horror recommendations of the week. And before we recommend something random, we've been talking about Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I don't want to spend forever on it, but let's talk about it.
Yeah.
I saw Kingdom and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
It is definitely a movie theater experience.
Yes. Go.
You need to see it in the theater. This film is beautiful.
Yes.
It is. I think we talked about it before on the show, but they shot it on location. And the way that they were able to, like, the actual CGI in this, where CGI gets thrown around, but CGI in this,
hair, dude,
it's great. There's a moment where Noah wakes up and there's like soot on him or like ash on him, and the way it looks so good. It's absolutely insane. I really liked it. I will say the first act was a little long because they have to establish this new trilogy and give you some exposition and background. So, I knew what I was getting into, but the end is wonderful. Kevin Durand, who's been on our show, puts on a great performance. Even, William H. Macy, fun little appearance there.
Had no clue when he showed up. I was like, William H. fucking Macy.
Yeah,
get out of town.
So
Frank, what are you doing here, Frank?
I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, dude, absolutely loved it. I did not find the beginning as slow as you did. I get it. Like I can respect that. But I was in.
It didn't put me off it by any means.
Sure. I get it. There's certain moments where I was very aware of like act structure, narrative structure, and like what you got to do. But I just loved it. I was so drawn in by the visuals, and the characters are instantly likable, and they're like, I don't know, just establishing like how this clan, maybe clan's not the right word, a group of what's a collection of apes called? There's a word for
what
that,
are
right?
They call themselves something, the hawk, the eagle something. What the fuck do they call themselves?
You know what I'm gonna call them?
Eagle Clan.
The Eagle Clan, sure.
Eagle Clan.
Or the homies, because I really love this franchise. I enjoyed every single second of getting to sit in that world. The night before, I rewatched Dawn. Not the third movie, but the second movie in the revamp of the franchise, and just got myself all hyped up, and I'm probably going to watch them all again really quick. Yes, we had Kevin Durand on. Amazing job. Loved his work. And also there's an interesting, I don't know what to type it in. I should have, or what you should type in to look at this, but there's an interesting interview of Kevin and Owen Teague. Is that how you say his name? I think Teague. Teague, Owen Teague, who plays Noah, and Kevin, who plays Proximus Caesar. There's a great interview of them because they did like, they didn't just sit in a voiceover room. They learned, and I don't know if it was full motion capture with the actor specifically, but I know that on this interview they were doing like ape movements, and that was a part of the process for them. And the two of them just become Noah or Noah and Proximus
Yeah.
on this show, and it was, dude, watching them switch and looking at two people but feeling like I'm looking at the two apes was awesome. And I don't know, I think I highly recommend everyone that loved the movie go look up that interview. I don't know what to type in, but I'm sure you'll be able to find it. It's good shit, man. And it's super, super cool.
The BTS for this sort of stuff is just wonderful. Like
I need to
the
watch
people that play these apes.
Terry Notary.
Yeah, Notary. Yeah. Terry Notary, I think, is also in this.
That checks out.
He just knows apes. He was in the original trilogy, and he just is the ape guy. And just the things that they do. He actually is not in this movie.
No, but isn't Andy? Did Andy?
Andy Serkis? I'm pretty sure Andy Serkis is in this movie.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, like, just these people are goats of mocap, and it's absolutely insane what they're.
It's such a cool art form. We haven't gotten anyone on to really talk about this yet. I mean, I guess when we talked with Luke Hawker, we talk a bit about it. I would love to get more people like that on. I know that we've wanted Terry before. So in the future, we're gonna get Andy too. Just wait.
Yeah, we're gonna get all the monkey people. Literally, every person that's ever played a monkey is gonna be on the show.
Goddamn right.
But yeah, so I'm excited to buy the Blu-ray so I can watch the behind the scenes stuff because it's just absolutely incredible. I think we talked about this with the Eye of the Duck guys, but made me excited for the Zelda film because Wes Ball, who's the director of Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, is doing the Zelda film.
I forgot that that's happening.
Yeah.
I said this last week, man. I am deep in Breath of the Wild. I've been playing that game, man. I am loving it. It's hitting my heart, hitting my soul. It is emotional, dude. Just had to say that.
On that note, let's do some recs this week. I'm gonna recommend a couple of things. The first thing I'm going to recommend is actually a VOD horror film that we didn't quite line up an interview for it. Sean actually hasn't seen it. I'm the only one that's seen it. Not in the world, just on the show. It is called Mind, Body, Spirit. It is a found footage horror film, found footage yoga horror film. It is a wonderful lead performance. And it's also, it does a lot of the tried and true found footage computer things that you would normally do. There's a couple of times in this film that really show that Alex Hens and Matthew Miranda, who are the directors of this film, really wanted to like experiment with stuff. And it's not just, for found footage, it's like, how can we experiment with how it's being captured? And like, they're basically saying like, we already know how we're capturing it because it's found footage, but like, what are we showing and how are we showing it? And how are we getting in the mindset of the lead, Sarah J. Bartholomew, who is wonderful and puts her full mind, body, and spirit into the performance. So definitely want to recommend it. I think it's fun to, see these smaller independent horror films, and would be curious what people think. So that's my first rec. My second recommendation of the week is the film A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. Specifically recommending it because we have a conversation soon where we reference this film, and it is referenced by the person that we have this conversation with. This is a film from 2016, 2014, one of the 2010s, by Anna Lily Amirpour, who did an episode of Cabinet of Curiosities as well. But it is a black and white Western Iranian vampire film. Like it's set in Iran. It has like a Western feel, like a neo-Western feel to it, and it's black and white, and it's just so interesting. It, even if it wasn't a vampire film, it would still be really interesting. It's just like it's like high art horror, without calling it like elevated or whatever, but just a really, really cool vampire movie.
Did that come out since we've had the show? I just remember talking about it like early on. No,
maybe? I found out about it like
Got you. So
you
you
know
might
when
have-
we started the show.
yeah, I just know we've talked about it, and I still haven't gotten around to seeing it. And,
Yeah, I don't know if
need to
it's
watch it.
streaming anywhere. But yeah, the film came out in 2014.
Got you.
But it
Okay.
just has, slowly and slowly.
Built up.
Yeah, slowly and slowly
following,
built up. But it's, written and directed by Anna Lily Amirpour. Yeah, it's just really freaking good. So huge
Heck yeah.
recommendation.
Very nice.
Yeah. What do you got?
Right on. I have a couple. Two of them are pretty basic and self-explanatory that go right along with the episode. In prepping for this episode, I went through and re-looked at all of Tony's art, which you can find on his socials. You can find on his website online. Highly recommend you guys do that. It is just, he just creates so many wonderful worlds to get lost in.
He's pretty good at that thing, at the drawing thing.
Yeah, at that thing that he does.
Yeah.
Dude, bro. He works with gouache a lot of the time, and gouache is really difficult. Like, looking at his art and knowing that he's primarily gouache to create these it blows my mind. Personally, I do not understand. His technical ability is so sound, and
Normally at Chipotle, gouache is extra.
Well, Tony loads up the gouache for sure. Tony does not skimp on the gouache, bro. But the other thing I was gonna say was, if you're the kind of person that can at all read, like I get a lot of joy out of reading, I'll even read like picture books, and I love going back and looking at that art form. I went and reread the whole Spiderwick series and had a blast doing that. Totally kids books, filled with great art, fun stories. Absolutely had a fun time. And my obligatory docu-series rec for the week is particularly terrible. I'm just going to be completely honest with you guys. It's weird to recommend stuff like this. It's because I don't want to make it just, it's not like entertainment. I don't know how to describe what it is.
It's a good documentary.
It's a really good documentary. Well, it's about some really fucked up shit. It's a docu-series called The Lake Erie Murders. And it covers a wide range of cases. It's a little bit confusing because it's not limited to like a case per episode. Like some cases will be a couple episodes and whatever. Yeah. It's a bit weird, but I haven't gone through the whole thing, but the first case, and first, like, there's some connection between cases, I guess is what I want to say, is very dark. It's very, very dark. It's very interesting. It happened a long time ago. Viewer discretion is advised. Stuff about kids. But if you are, I'm just being
I
so
like that
real,
you're like,
man.
read the Spiderwick Chronicles, and then this
yeah.
Lake Erie murder, dude.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so, because it's a hard thing to like explain. Kind of the morbid curiosity there, and just like learning about the evil people in our world and the terrible things that happen. But I'm sure that there are, our listeners can understand that. And proceed with caution. Lake Erie Murders. It's also close to home, I think, is a big part of it too. But yeah,
that makes sense.
Those
That's
are the
good.
recs.
That got me thinking about what I'm watching right now. Which if you haven't watched Baby Reindeer yet, watch
I
it.
know
You'll get sucked in instantly.
Yeah,
and
it's
a quick watch.
I'm gonna.
Been watching Jeopardy Masters. Them folks is smart, dude. They're so smart. It's like on a normal episode of Jeopardy, like I feel confident that I'll get at least like 10 answers right, which is like, I'm proud whenever I get an answer. Jeopardy Masters is like 2 or 3 an episode. And also like they answer them so much faster than I do.
Right.
I can't even keep it's not even
really quick. How do you just know shit about everything? Like,
I
don't fucking.
It is crazy. Like there's this one woman on. It's their first time on Masters on Jeopardy Masters, which is like the best of the best. Like 6 of the best people. Figure out who's the
biggest
best.
nerds,
straight up. And this one woman, Victoria Gross, will answer a question about like a fjord in Africa. There's no fjords in Africa. A fjord in Iceland.
Fjord.
It's like a narrow inlet into like of water into land. But she'll like name a fjord in Icelandic, and then she'll like tell you about a Jane Austen novel, and then also like do algebra. It's absolutely insane.
She's like, funny thing, it's not Alex. I don't know who's hosting now, but funny thing, Alex, I actually used to read Jane Austen novels at the fjord at my parents' cottage.
It's literally like she literally answered. There was this one clue where it was like, what's the name of this Chinese tree, or this tree found in China where it's known that all of its leaves fall off in one day. That's like an actual thing. She was like, oh, it's the plinko tree. And she was like, I'm actually wearing it right now. And her dress had the flowers on it. It was just like a weird coincidence. But yeah, dude, some of the shit, it's absolutely crazy. I will say, one of the people on the show, James Holzhauer, who I think Ken Jennings, who's now the host, R.I.P. Alex Trebek. Ken Jennings, who's now the host, I think has won the most games, but James Holzhauer has won the most money overall when he was playing Jeopardy, like outside of the Masters competition.
Sure.
And he basically just takes all of his winnings and like donates it, and has this like thing where he like the last 100K that he made or whatever, he sent like 40 kids to college, and then
that's
like
awesome.
He works really hard, like helping unhoused people in Vegas. Like it's really, he specifically, James Holzhauer, is really cool. And yeah, so anyways, watch Jeopardy Masters. I love Jeopardy.
Love it.
That shit slaps.
I'm gonna say two things. One, I'm bummed that, for the sense of marketing and listener understanding, that we have to like say the name of our guest and whatever on an episode, because if we could just free name episodes, this one would be called Fjord or something. I would 100% drink a $9 tall boy at a fjord show.
I'm staying at some fjords in Iceland when I go.
I bet you are. but that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, you said you had two things. What was the other thing?
I forgot.
Right.
I don't remember.
Do you like Jeopardy? Send us an email, mostlyhorrormovienight@gmail.com. Send us I don't know. Tell us your favorite fjord. Go to
what
IG.
fjord is best.
What fjord is best?
That's
Instagram.
the name of the episode.
Instagram @mostlyhorrorpod. Threads also is the same @mostlyhorrorpod. You can find us on Twitter and TikTok @mostlyhorror. I'm everywhere @StevenIsAverage. Sean's on all the socials @Hypocrite Inc. or hypocrite.inc. And that is all we have for you this week. We'll catch you next time.
Goodbye.